The night was thick with fog, the kind that clung to the bones and seeped into the soul. In the heart of a medieval village, the air was heavy with secrets and whispers. Tarquin, a man of noble birth, stood at the threshold of a house, his heart pounding with a mix of fear and desire. His eyes, dark and intense, darted around, searching for any sign of life. He was not alone in his struggle. Inside his mind, a fierce battle raged. Affection, the strongest of his inner voices, urged him forward. "Follow me and let nothing stand in your way," it whispered. But alongside affection, respect and reason pleaded for restraint. "Think of the consequences, of the shame," they argued. Tarquin's heart and eyes were at war, and the eyes, driven by youthful passion, won. With a determined step, he crossed the threshold, leaving reason and respect behind. Inside, the room was dimly lit, the air thick with the scent of roses. Lucrece, the woman he desired, lay in her bed, unaware of the storm that was about to break. Tarquin's presence was a dark shadow, a threat to her peace. As he approached, the conflict within her began to mirror his own. Her mind, once calm, was now a battleground. Patience, a virtue she had always cherished, was no match for the fierce passions that assailed her. She felt the weight of the struggle, the invisible forces that tore at her soul. The concept of the mind as a battlefield was not new. In the medieval world, mental states were often imagined as quasi-material entities, capable of guiding, deceiving, and even defeating a person. This idea was deeply embedded in the culture, from morality plays to epic poetry. In Spenser's The Faerie Queene, the virtues were depicted as warrior knights, fighting against the forces of evil. In Shakespeare's The Rape of Lucrece, the inner conflict between Tarquin's affection and reason was a vivid example of this psychomagic imagery. Shakespeare often used such personifications to explore the complexities of human nature. In Romeo and Juliet, for instance, death was not just a concept but a physical presence, a bridegroom who deflowered the bride. The imagery of the mind as a battleground was a powerful tool, one that allowed Shakespeare to delve deep into the ethical and moral dimensions of his characters. The idea of personification extended beyond the stage and into everyday life. In medieval art, vices and virtues were often depicted in vivid detail, their forms instantly recognizable. Fortune with her ever-spinning wheel and death as a skeletal figure were familiar icons. These images were not just artistic expressions. They were part of a larger cultural framework that shaped how people understood their own inner lives. In the world of medieval drama, these personifications were brought to life. The 7 deadly sins appeared in Marlowe's Dr. Faustus, where they were acted out by devils. In Appius and Virginia, conscience and justice emerged from the mind of the wicked judge, taking on physical form to confront him. These dramas made the abstract real, turning the inner conflict of the mind into a visible, tangible struggle. Shakespeare, too, sometimes staged these personifications, as in the prologue of To Henry IV, where rumor appeared, or in The Winter's Tale, where time took the stage. Even in his plays where personifications were not explicitly staged, the language he used was rich with the imagery of mental conflict. In Titus Andronicus, Tamora and her sons claimed to embody revenge, rape, and murder, blurring the line between the individual and the abstract. The language of personification was not just a literary device. It was a reflection of the way people thought and spoke. In early modern English, the use of nouns and verbs to describe mental states was common, creating a sense of action and drama. When Shakespeare wrote, "Such passion her assails, that patience is quite beaten from her breast," he was not just using a metaphor. He was creating a mini-drama that played out in the mind of the reader or listener. The boundary between the literal and the allegorical was often blurred, especially in Shakespeare's work. When he wrote, "Injurious time now with a robber's haste crams his rich thievery up," time was not just a concept, it was a character, a thief who acted with purpose. This kind of language invited the audience to visualize the action, to see the abstract as real. Modern readers, less familiar with this way of thinking, may miss the depth of these personifications. Editors often struggle with how to present them, sometimes capitalizing words like time or death to signal their significance. But the original audiences, steeped in a culture of personification, understood these images instinctively. They saw the mind as a stage, where virtues and vices, passions and reason, fought for control. As Tarquin stood over Lucrece, the battle within him raged on. His heart, driven by desire, had won the day. But the consequences of his actions would echo through the ages, a testament to the power of the mind as a battleground, where the forces of good and evil, passion and reason, fought for the soul of a man. In Shakespeare's world, the concepts of fame and fortune were deeply rooted in medieval traditions, which influenced his plays in significant ways. Unlike the classical Greek and Roman ideas that often celebrated these concepts, Shakespeare's portrayal aligns more closely with the medieval skepticism found in the works of Chaucer and Caxton. Fame in Shakespeare's plays is not just a positive attribute, but can also be seen as a herald of uncertain events. This perspective is more in line with Chaucer's The House of Fame, where fame is depicted with a more critical and skeptical tone. In The House of Fame, Chaucer questions the reliability and constancy of fame, which is a theme that Shakespeare echoes in his works. For example, in Henry V, the knights are portrayed as fighting for their lady's honor, a theme that is more medieval in nature, reflecting the chivalric code of the time. Fortune, often depicted as fame's sister, had an even more prominent role in medieval literature and culture. The iconic image of Fortune's wheel, which can lift one up only to bring them down, was popularized by Boethius's Consolation of Philosophy in the 6th century. This image became a common motif in medieval literature, appearing in works like Boccaccio's De Casibus Verorum Illustrium, Chaucer's Monk's Tale, and The Mirror for Magistrates. By the time Shakespeare was writing, the image of Fortune's wheel had become a cliché, but it still carried significant weight in the context of Elizabethan tragedy. Shakespeare often uses the image of Fortune's wheel to explore the themes of rise and fall, but he does so in a way that avoids the cliché. For instance, in Richard II, Richard's downfall is not just a matter of external forces, but a result of his own actions and choices. When Richard compares himself to Phaeton, the mythological figure who lost control of the sun chariot, it is not just a simile but a personal identification. This internalization of Fortune's influence is a key aspect of Shakespeare's characterization, making the abstract concept more human and immediate. The gendering of abstract concepts, such as justice and fortune, also reflects the medieval and Renaissance traditions. In Latin, abstract nouns are often feminine, and this gendering influenced the way these concepts were personified in art and literature. For example, justice is typically depicted as a woman holding a sword, even though the sword is a symbol of male power. In English, however, the use of gender is tied to biological sex, which gives a different nuance to the personification of these concepts. Shakespeare often follows the Latin tradition, but he also uses the English language's flexibility to create unique characterization. Shakespeare's use of names to convey deeper meanings is another way he explores the intersection of character and concept. For example, in Henry VIII, Catherine of Aragon's waiting woman, Patience, is named to emphasize the virtue of patience, which is crucial in the context of her death. Similarly, in The Winter's Tale, Hermione's exclamation, "Would her name were Grace," highlights the idea of grace as both a personal attribute and a theological concept. The representation of women in Shakespeare's plays is also influenced by medieval traditions. Medieval literature often portrayed women as embodiments of virtues, and this influence is evident in Shakespeare's heroines. Characters like Rosalind, Cordelia, and Imogen serve as the moral center of their respective plays, embodying virtues such as love, integrity, and grace. Even when these women are not explicitly named for virtues, they carry the moral and ethical weight associated with these concepts. In Cymbeline, for instance, Imogen's renaming herself as Fidel, meaning faithful or loyal, is a clear example of how a name can convey a deeper moral and ethical meaning. This practice of using names to reflect character traits is not limited to major characters. Minor characters often have names that suggest their role in the play, such as Satan in Macbeth, who is a shadowy figure closely associated with Macbeth's downfall. The medieval and Renaissance traditions of personification and naming practices deeply influenced Shakespeare's approach to character and narrative. These traditions helped him create a rich and dynamic world where abstract concepts are brought to life, and characters are shaped by the moral and ethical values they embody. This intersection of character and concept is a key element in the power and depth of Shakespeare's plays. Shakespeare's plays often explore the history of Britain, especially during the reign of Elizabeth I, when he wrote 10 plays that delved into the island's past from an English perspective. After James VI of Scotland became King James I of England in 1603, Shakespeare shifted his focus to legendary British history, creating works like King Lear, Cymbeline, and Macbeth. These plays contributed to the idea of a united British nation under a single crown, a concept that was very appealing to the newly united kingdoms. William Camden, a prominent historian and antiquarian, published Remains Concerning Britain in 1605, which aimed to restore the ancient history and geography of Britain. Camden's work was part of a broader effort to create a shared historical identity for the British people. He believed that understanding the island's past could help unite its diverse populations. Camden's approach was to gather and interpret physical remains, such as ancient monuments and place names, to reconstruct a narrative of Britain's historical continuity. Shakespeare's plays, like Camden's work, often drew from the legendary past of Britain. For example, in Cymbeline, he retold the story of Cymbeline, a king of Britain during the Roman era. The play included elements of historical legend, such as the 2 sons of Cymbeline who were stolen, and later played a crucial role in a British victory over the Romans. This blend of myth and history helped create a sense of national pride and unity. The idea of a united Britain was particularly important during the reign of James I, who hoped to merge the English and Scottish kingdoms into a single nation. While his political efforts failed, Shakespeare's plays continued to promote the idea of a shared British identity. The plays often emphasize the themes of loyalty to the king and the unity of the people, reflecting the political aspirations of the time. Shakespeare's historical plays also influenced later historians and writers. Even though professional historians later dismissed the idea of rhetorical historiography as romantic and unscientific, Shakespeare's narratives continued to shape popular perceptions of British history. For example, the Wars of the Roses, a series of civil wars in the 15th century, were often seen through the lens of Shakespeare's plays, which emphasized the cyclical nature of history and the importance of dynastic struggles. The past was a source of pride and identity for the British people. Legends and historical narratives, whether true or embellished, played a crucial role in shaping the national consciousness. Shakespeare's plays, by drawing on these stories, helped to create a shared understanding of Britain's history and a sense of belonging among its people. This shared history, though often idealized, was a powerful tool for fostering national unity and identity. Geoffrey of Monmouth, a key figure in medieval historiography, is famous for his book, Historia regum Britanniae, History of the Kings of Britain, where he weaved together various legends and myths to create a coherent, albeit fictional, history of Britain. Geoffrey's genius lay in his ability to blend uncertain and often fantastical tales with more established historical narratives, creating a narrative that seemed both ancient and authoritative. This approach allowed him to bridge the gap between the legendary past and the more documented history, making his work influential for centuries. Geoffrey's narrative begins with the mythical Brutus, a descendant of Aeneas, who is said to have founded Britain. This connection to the Trojan hero Aeneas, and by extension to the legendary founding of Rome, gave Geoffrey's account a sense of grandeur and legitimacy. The stories of Brutus and his successors, including the famous King Arthur, were filled with themes of love, betrayal, and revenge, creating a rich tapestry of history that resonated with readers and later playwrights. Geoffrey's influence can be seen in the works of subsequent writers, such as Robert Wace and Layman, who translated and adapted his stories into Anglo-Norman and Middle English. These adaptations helped to spread Geoffrey's narrative across different cultures and languages, ensuring its enduring legacy. By the 16th century, writers like Holinshed and Shakespeare drew upon these legends, integrating them into their own works and further cementing them in the cultural consciousness of England. One of the most notable aspects of Geoffrey's narrative is its genealogical structure, presenting a continuous line of kings that traced back to mythical origins. This genealogy was often visualized in the form of family trees, which were displayed in public spaces to reinforce the legitimacy of rulers. For example, Edward IV used such genealogical roles to justify his claim to the throne, presenting his lineage as a direct and unbroken line from ancient times. Shakespeare, in his historical plays, often drew upon these legendary histories, using them to explore themes of power, loyalty, and national identity. For instance, in King Lear, the legendary King Lear is presented as a figure whose reign is marked by familial strife and political turmoil, reflecting the broader themes of Geoffrey's narrative. Similarly, in Cymbeline, Shakespeare delves into the pre-Roman history of Britain, using the character of Cymbeline to explore the tensions between British independence and Roman influence. The legends of Britain, as preserved and popularized by Geoffrey of Monmouth, continue to shape the cultural and political discourse of England. They provided a shared history that transcended religious and political divides, offering a sense of national unity and identity. Even as attitudes toward historical truth evolved, the legends remained a powerful and enduring presence in English literature and culture, influencing writers and thinkers for generations. Shakespeare's plays, including those focused on British history, offer deep insights into the complex identity of the British Isles. These plays, such as Edward III, Henry V, and Cymbeline, explore the idea of nationhood and the relationships between different peoples within the British Isles. For instance, Edward III delves into the question of whether a good governor must also govern himself, reflecting on the challenges of leadership and governance. Similarly, Henry V portrays the English king rallying his troops with a powerful sense of national pride, using the phrase "God for Harry, England, and St. George" to unite his diverse forces. However, the concept of a unified British nation was not straightforward. In Henry V, the character Macmorris, an Irish sapper, questions what it means to belong to a nation, highlighting the tensions and conflicts within the English army. This raises important questions about identity and loyalty, especially in a time when the term Britain was not yet in common use. Instead, people identified themselves with their specific regions such as Ireland, Scotland, or Wales, rather than a unified British identity. Shakespeare's use of the term nation in his plays is significant. In Richard III, for example, Henry Tudor, the Earl of Richmond, comes from Britain to save England, distinguishing between the continental and insular Britain. However, the term Britain is rarely used in Shakespeare's plays, suggesting that the idea of a unified British nation was still evolving. Instead, terms like England, Wales, and Scotland were more common, reflecting the diverse identities of the people within the British Isles. The historical context of Shakespeare's plays is crucial. In the 15th century, Edward IV commissioned pictorial roles to legitimize his rule, tracing his lineage back to legendary figures like King Arthur. These roles, while visually impressive, were not entirely factual but served to reinforce the idea of a continuous and ancient British history. This tradition of using legendary history to legitimize rule continued into Shakespeare's time, influencing his portrayal of historical figures and events. Shakespeare's plays, particularly Cymbeline, draw on these legendary histories, which were part of a broader European tradition of appealing to ancient lineage and heritage. These narratives were not just about recounting the past, but were also used to shape contemporary political and social identities. For example, the idea of a unified British nation was a powerful concept that kings like James VI and the First of Scotland and England used to justify their rule over multiple peoples. The legendary histories, while often dismissed as fanciful, played a crucial role in shaping social and political thought. Writers like Spenser and Milton drew on these traditions to explore themes of unity and identity. For instance, Spenser's The Faerie Queene and Milton's History of Britain both engage with the idea of a shared British heritage, even if they questioned its historical accuracy. In the end, Shakespeare's plays offer a rich tapestry of British history, blending fact and legend to explore the complex relationships between different peoples and the evolving concept of a unified British nation. His works invite us to consider how these narratives have shaped our understanding of national identity and the historical legacy of the British Isles. By recontextualizing these ancient stories, Shakespeare provides a foundation for understanding the modern British nation, one that is both ancient and new, unified and diverse.